Welcome to the Level Up Artist Podcast. We're your hosts, Adriana May and
Jackie Sanders. We are two art professionals sharing for the advice and business lessons we have learned along our creative journeys.
we talk to artists, leaders, and art professionals to demystify the creative process and discover new ways to succeed as a career-minded artist.
If you find value in these conversations, please go ahead and subscribe. This will help other creatives like you find our podcast, and you'll be notified when we drop a new episode every Tuesday. So on today's episode, it's going to be a bit more of a conversational, casual episode because it is our first studio update of 2025, which is so exciting. Obviously, we had our start of the year goal setting episode that we released a few weeks back, but now we're kind of already implementing those things, right? So we want to provide a studio update of demystifying that creative process, what's going on behind the scenes in real time, the good, the bad, and everything in between. Almost as if you were sitting in on one of our catch-ups in our studio of just what's going on in each other's business. So we're hoping to do a handful more episodes like this, a little bit more casual. So let us know what you think of them, if you like them, if you like the more structured ones, because we'll just see how they work out. But loosely for today's episode, we're going to be talking about what has been going on with each of us, including the Rooted conference specifically that we just got back from, which I know we're very eager to unpack a bunch of things from that. Some current events, including the TikTok ban that at the time of this being released, who knows what that's going to be about, and some action items or challenges that we're putting into practice that we're going to share with you guys of what you can do too. So, as we dive into today's episode, Adriano, what were your thoughts on the Rooted conference that we just got back from? And try to keep the rant under 3 hours because we can only listen for so long.
Oh my goodness, where to even start? Okay, so first things first, if you don't know anything about Rooted yet, haven't seen it on our socials, it's okay. Don't worry. Especially if murals are not what you specialize in or not your scene yet, right? This might be new to you. So we did two episodes, back episode 186 and 187 about the Rooted Muralist Conference, where we talked to the first person that was like initiating the program as well as one of her second in commands, if you will, both of them muralists. So go listen to those to get like some of the background of where it got started and kind of like what their goals were with the event. So we both attended, so we get to share with you some of our, exciting what happened afterwards type situation.
Yeah.
And I'll say like some of the main takeaways. So first off, it was networking on steroids. Like it was insane. There were like 70, I want to say, around
Yeah.
muralists. Um some of them starting out, some of them super seasoned, some of them just in the middle, some of them getting back to it after a big break or juggling full-time corporate jobs or retail jobs and doing art. Like, I mean, everybody from the US and Canada. I don't know if we had any other countries, but definitely those two were well represented. And it was just like this amazing, like there were just like so many deep and meaningful conversations. And some of it was just like fun, let's get together, let's make this happen. But a lot of it was, like super validating, right? To be able to hear
Yeah.
that we have some of the same hopes and dreams and challenges and having these echoed by creatives in all types of career stages, even some folks that maybe we put on a pedestal, like they have a big following or they're financially successful and they just like are scared of the same exact stuff we are, right? Or they're worried about the same stuff we are. It's just kind of like I
Yeah.
don't know,
And
super
to your point,
interesting.
like even validating that they're also thinking about similar things that we are, right? Like they're still
Mhm,
thinking
mhm.
about, okay, diversifying income streams, or how do I balance my like physical and mental health while doing a very like labor intensive job that's muraling? How do I plan for that in the future of my career? Maybe they're 10 years down the road and they're feeling like, okay, I need to pivot out of it, or how do my people that are in their early 20s pivoting into muraling. So I love that part too, in terms of it was also obviously all backgrounds, all points in their career, but also all ages as well. I think
Yeah.
even just from like a human level, being able to have the common point of a creative practice. Obviously, it's a bit more niche with muraling, but just a creative practice in general. And then having intentional conversation with other women to where we also just view the world at different phases of our life naturally. So how you view in your 20s versus 30s versus 60s. It was also just great. I don't know, it sounds cliche and corny, but just like as women connecting about, okay, well, how do you view your career? What are the priorities in your life that you want to lean into? Like, what is your vision for the future? And how can that be made happen through a career such as being a muralist? So, yeah,
Yeah.
I love that as well. Just definitely networking on steroids.
Yeah. Yeah. And then, well, just like I said with the stages, like there were also conversations of like more unique challenges that we face as women, like security concerns if you're alone muraling at night,
Yeah.
or the ones that are also responsible for taking care of younger ones, or even if they're parents. And that responsibility almost defaults to them. How do they balance that and also try to be like do muraling as their job? So there was a lot of those types of conversations. That was really interesting. I think from a strategic point of view, a big takeaway for me was definitely conversations about income streams and reinforcing basically hearing like some of the changes that I've started to do in my business, including a change to my business structure from sole proprietorship to LLC, is a step in the right direction. As someone or as a business person that in the future I'd like to do an S corp. Hear that word correctly. S corp, not escort. Um, filing in future years. Anyways, that one was funny when somebody said S corp and somebody went escort. Like,
Yeah,
no,
there
not
was
that.
someone
S
they
corp.
they asked
It
the
was
entire
funny.
group, they're like, "Oh, so who is an S corp?" And everyone, we swear they thought they asked the entire group who is an escort. And we're all
Yeah.
like, it was a really funny moment because also there was no one that had like a big reaction. It was like, this is a place of acceptance. We support you. Do whatever you want.
That's
Like,
what your job is. We're not here to
right,
judge
no
your exotic
judgment.
dancing experience. So,
But when it was clarified, it was really funny.
yeah, it definitely was. But it was
Like, add
definitely
that
nice to
income
be
stream.
like, yeah, it was nice to see like in terms of like business changes and strategy and seeing how, regardless if it was somebody starting out, but especially the ones that had been doing it a while, them sharing no gatekeeping on how their businesses are set up and then going like,
Yeah.
am I getting closer to that, or what steps do I need to take to have a similar structure, assuming that it applies to my specific business situation.
Yeah, I thought that was really amazing too. Like something from, I don't know, I think conferences in general, like rewind a little bit. So when we interviewed them on the podcast, the host of the Rooted conference, transparently, Adriana, you were already signed up to go to the conference, right? At that point.
Yeah.
So you had already bought your ticket for it and I did not. I was not planning on going. Or I didn't intentionally really think about it,
No,
to
the
be honest.
tickets had sold out. That's what it
Yeah.
was, because they had a
Yeah.
limited first run. And when you looked into it and we interviewed them, they were already fully booked. And I think
Yeah.
online, virtual was the only version at that time, and it wasn't
Yeah.
out yet. Something like
Yeah,
that.
that's right. And also thinking about this is definitely a flaw of mine that I think time and time again that I am proven wrong with. I kind of feel like, okay, well, is this going to be worth not only the money, but just the time to attend? Like, what am I going to get out of this experience that I couldn't get in XYZ other places, right? I can be like a little defiant when it comes to events or like undermining the value of an experience like this. And at the time, I had just gotten laid off from my corporate job. I think it was like a month or maybe two after. And so financially, I was like stressing hard, not even from just obviously logistics of living, but just definitely having a scarcity mindset with a lot of things in life. And after having the conversation with them, it really honestly energized me. And I talked to them after we recorded, after the episode that you guys heard, of just like, I felt like it was a pep talk that I personally needed. And I went back and listened to the conversation like 3 times. Like, you know, that feeling with you, like you have a really good conversation with a friend, and you're almost like, man, I wish I could just listen to that every time I'm doubting myself. I've literally done that with the Rooted podcast episode. So I was like, okay, that episode really energized me. I would love to go to this conference maybe next year because, again, the tickets were sold out. So, super fast forward, they ended up having very generous donors offer scholarships. And I received one of the scholarships, which was incredible. And I think it, again, reiterated to me the importance of finding that shift in not just physical space, but mindset space that conferences in general offer, right? I can definitely undervalue how important your mindset is, but it really is such a differentiator with how is next week going to be different from this week, right? So taking that time to really show myself that no, like muraling has been something I've talked about wanting to level up in my business. I have at this point 3 murals under my belt, but like what is going to be that pivot point of change as to why 2025 is different than it was in 2024?
Mm-hmm.
So really deciding that no, this is a priority. I want to make it happen. And I say all that to say, one, it was definitely worth it. I'm so glad. What or so grateful that I was fortunate enough to be able to go, especially with the scholarship. But I think I want to reiterate to our listeners and to myself in the future too, if I'm listening to this episode again. Hello, future Jackie. To decide on for conferences, it is really important to figure out like what kind of conference or event you think you really need right now and focusing on that. Obviously, it can be shiny object syndrome with there's always events and conferences to go to, but really focus on, okay, what would I benefit the most from? In terms of like, where do I feel like I'm lacking a little bit? Is it like developing a specific set of business skills in terms of marketing or financing or like actual logistics of a tool? Maybe it is getting your hands on like painting skills, doing a workshop, doing like a hands-on experience. Or is it an event that's like networking with potential clients? Right? Like, I think just attending events is wonderful, but really thinking strategically about, like, okay, well, what do I need and will that serve this? Um, and I think that's why I benefited so much from the Rooted conference was because I needed that like mural mindset shift. Um, and that's exactly what that provided, right? Um, so yeah, and another tip if you are attending a conference type event, one thing that I found was super helpful to avoid the overwhelm. And I'm very fortunate or glad that I did that now that we're home from the conference and I'm like putting things into action is for so the way the conference was structured was like guest speakers or panelists or like breakout sessions with other artists. But for every like seminar or panel discussion, of course, taking notes, soaking in all of the gems that they were generous enough to offer. But on the right-hand side of my paper, I always added a column of post-conference action items. And so I would write down 2 to 5 things that while they were talking, I was like, oh, I would love to do that. Oh, I should put that in my business. Oh, wait, I should research that. Because you come home just like overwhelmed and excited. And you're like, I'm gonna hit the ground running. And then you just like sit at your desk and you're like, but what am I like, what do I actually do? You know, like you're just feeling inspired, but not sure what actions to take. So it's nice having that column. Okay, like here's notes of what they talked about. But when you sit down at your desk, research this platform, look into XYZ thing, organize these pictures of whatever. So really taking action on the things because that's the benefit of any type of class, workshop, seminar is the action items that you put into place afterwards.
Yeah, yeah. On mine, I had my iPad set up on the table I was sitting at, and I brought a Bluetooth keyboard, and I was like literally typing away notes. And
Yeah.
whenever I heard something that was a takeaway, I would bold that. I literally would just like
Yeah.
put
Oh
asterisk and bolded and like
Asterisk,
color
asterisk,
coded or
underline.
whatever. Yeah, so that then now when I scroll through my gigantic document of notes that I did, I wish I had split it up, but I did it all in one, which is fine. I can literally scroll through and see where my action items are, which is part of like why we wanted to have this conversation too. It's just like to share what some of those things look like. But I agree with Jackie. Like I definitely also had the mindset leading up to the tickets being available, the first round of tickets, which was only 32. I also had the do I deserve this? Like self-worth was part of the
Yeah.
conversation. Like this is an investment. This is not $100 ticket. This is a lot more than that. So it was like, do I deserve this? Can I justify this cost in my business? Do I have a mural lined up that technically pays this off
Mhm.
essentially? Or so I had a lot of thoughts about that. And I did have some reservations. Now, once we started getting closer, and especially after we interviewed them, I definitely was a little bit more like, okay, I believe in the mission of what this is or what our hostess was trying to accomplish with it. So as we got closer to it and saw kind of like what they had on social media and kind of like what they were sharing, like they were trying to do with it, I definitely got a little bit more convinced, a little bit at a time, to the point that when the tickets went live, yeah, I had the countdown on my phone to
Yeah.
ready to hit, buy and whatnot. And I don't regret it. I mean, I've been to conferences, some of which are a little bit uh more overwhelming or underwhelming actually, just like variety pack. And I do come from a corporate environment where we did have different types of events and stuff.
I think that's a
So,
good
so
clarifying point too. Like we've both attended corporate conferences in different industries. And so we're kind of
oh
like
yeah,
used to that structure. But I
yeah.
love your point that you made too about like, am I even worthy of this? Because
Hmm.
whether it's a higher ticket item conference, whether it's any type of investment into your business, even if it's like, oh, a networking event that $10 admission. Like I remember having that thought and feeling at the start of my creative business when like I was literally budgeting my personal life down to like the $10 because I was working an hourly wage job that like I needed to be that detailed with my budget to avoid the spiral, you know? And so
Yep.
being like $10, like that's like one night of going out to dinner, but like
Hmm.
I think there's like that worthiness factor, right? So I think that's a very relatable, whether it's this conference, any other conference, or just, okay, investing back into your business. So,
Yeah, no, for sure. And on that one, I decided I'm like, well, I originally wanted around the same time frame to, if you've heard some of our older episodes, around the same time of the year, I did my Penland winter residency. So I was having some thoughts about that. Um, like which am I going to prioritize? And this time around, I was like, well, I'd like 2025 to have more of an emphasis on murals, which if you've listened to previous mural up or studio updates, you've heard me go mural, mural, mural. So I was like, well, one is for more of an artistic development,
mm,
and this one's more business development. Let's call it that
yeah.
in a specific industry slash income stream. So I was like, well, I could use more skills in this area. I could use learning from people that have been doing it longer than I have, and or appear again. It's always we don't know what's going on in the balance sheet, but appear to be more financially successful. And is there anything that they want to share that I could implement? So with that, with that idea of like us literally Jack and I like talking about murals and trying to be like what does the 25 kind of mindset shift, what's that going to look like, murals versus the other sides of our business and creative process. It kind of got us thinking about kind of how we got started and how long we've been doing this for. So I
Mhm.
was kind of looking back through, flipping through the old memory noodle and being like, well, my first mural was way back in 2021, which feels a long time away now because, COVID made everything a lot longer back then. But doing that, doing community painting projects on larger canvases, just kind of having like those experiences earlier on. At the time, I did have, speaking of like, deserving and mindset and things like that, at the time, I basically had this idea of my art style would not translate well to large scale. And I had been seeing on Instagram or online, whatever, I had been seeing posts of muralists doing these, I mean, gigantic murals, right? Like 7-story high on the side of a giant building type thing. And I remember back then going, I don't even know if my art could scale to that. Like I can't even fathom how would I get this texture element, or even if it's visual, not necessarily textural, but I was like getting stuck in the technical side.
Mm,
And there's this stereotypical unfortunately pitfall that a lot of people go through, especially women, unfortunately, of not applying to a job until you're 99% qualified, which is absolutely ridiculous
uh,
when you think about it. But it's this whole like, I can't until I get to a certain point. So I was like, I can't just scale up and go big all the time. So my version of it was to do it a little bit at a time. So I started with a smaller mural. I started with larger canvases, but still small compared to mural, and then just going bigger and bigger and bigger. So instead of like jumping straight on, which a lot of people do, I kind of took more of a gradual approach, in part because I was also changing my art style. I was modifying the way that I was painting with the idea that in the future it could work on a much larger scale. So that's when I started moving away from blending as much as I was in my colors, which turns out, had I used spray paint, like it would be fine. But at the time, I didn't even know how to translate that. But and moving more towards hard edge abstraction. And I was like, oh, if I do it this way, whether it's a community project or I'm doing this literally on a gigantic scale, it's going to translate a lot easier. And I could have other people come out with me and help me, finish a giant project in a much shorter amount of time. Also, it would be more accessible for community members that do not have an artistic background. If we treat this like a color by numbers mural type situation, right?
mhm.
So literally like all these years back, I was already like starting to strategize, like how can I add murals to my portfolio, and how can I kind of expand my body of work to not just be like, oh, I painted a donut logo for money, which is great, nothing wrong with that, but more, how can I make sure that the murals that I want to add tie back to my paintings, tie back to my sculpture, right? So that was
Yeah.
like a super challenging kind of way to do it. And I didn't feel comfortable just jumping in. So I kind of did it gradual. My biggest mural to date was back in 2023. In 2024, I was able to tackle several mural projects, but I did have my spinal injury, so that kind of put a damper on it, and I had to put the brakes on applying to opportunities because at the time I didn't even know if I was going to paint again at all.
Yeah.
So that was like super scary moment for a while, but
Mm.
definitely as I started to get my mobility back, I was like, I'm sure about this now. I want 2025 to definitely have murals be the biggest focus of it. I'm still going to do the fine art side of things. I can't give that up anyway. So I'm still going to do my painting commissions, which are still a super important part of my practice, and sculptures as well, but intentionally balancing the commercial side on the mural side of things and then the fine art part of my practice and my business, while intending to, again, treat my murals as an extension of my body of work. So definitely a challenge. If I was like mural wise, I'm going to paint whatever. There will definitely be more mural jobs in my future. And I'm not saying I won't. I'm not saying I won't. Even one of the presenters we had was like, "Hey, I've had to do stuff that like it pays the bills, but I'm not putting it on social media because it doesn't match
Yeah.
anything else." So there's that mindset too. And I think like for those of you that maybe do painting commissions as well, I'm sure you've had to face this before of like, I will do that one pet portrait, but I am not a pet portrait artist. I do
Yeah.
people instead, but I'll do that one pet. I'm just not going to advertise it because it was really hard. And I'd rather paint people, for example. So, anyways, whatever that may look like to you. But there was definitely a lot of that post conference processing of like, okay, how are we gonna implement some of these shifts into 2025? So yeah. How about you,
Yeah.
Jackie?
Yeah, I think that's was kind of like the biggest. takeaway from the conference, as we were talking about, like from a mindset shift standpoint. And again, obviously we already did our like 2025 planning and 2024 recap episodes. Obviously, even having a podcast where we intentionally talk about those things is a good mindset to enter the year with. But yeah, I think the conference really solidified for me um, kind of what those action items are for me or what my priorities for 2025 are, even more than what we already discussed on that episode. Um, and I think especially solidifying for me, from an income stream standpoint, it's always been a priority for me to like never quote unquote just be one thing. I think I also just love being a beginner in processes. I love exploring new things. So having, as we talk about on the podcast a lot, those multiple income streams and then meeting artists who also have multiple income streams in their business just on a different level was really refreshing and rewarding. So although I have um multiple and I've kind of tried everything. In 2025, I'm really looking to focus in on a handful of them, more specifically, obviously murals, art products, and then corporate signage and awards. Because really mapping out in one of the seminars, they talked about multiple income streams. And it was really cool and almost validating to map out, okay, when did I add each of those income streams into my business? Um, and then like, okay, now based off of that track, where do I want to go? So in 2022, I did my first corporate awards for a local nonprofit. And then 2023 was when I did my first mural at the skate park and at a car dealership. I'd assisted a couple of artists previous to that, including even like in college in 2016. There was an amazing artist from New York that came down, and that was like part of my working hours was getting in like a huge lift and doing like a two-story mural, which I literally forgot about until I was at this conference. And I'm like, oh, I've literally done that 10 years ago, which is crazy.
Yep.
And then my first corporate signage project for the same company that I do the awards for in 2024. And really looking at those as one, those are all income streams that I really enjoy the process of doing, right? But also, two, they're become very lucrative from an income standpoint, which I think is like that perfect balance. As you were talking about, Adriana, it's sometimes you can be like, well, the money's good. I don't really enjoy it, but the money's good. Or I really, really love doing it, but no one is paying for it or buying it. So, like, do I love it enough to keep doing it even though no one's buying it? So, trying to find that balance of something that you enjoy and makes money is like that sweet spot, as we know, for artists. So, those are the three that I've really focused on. And I know we talked about it on the recap episode, but I think the conference really solidified that for me of, okay, this is what I want to, from a business standpoint, lean into and like level up those income streams. So good
Yeah.
mindset post conference.
Absolutely. Yeah, you definitely brought up some good points. And, it's something that when we talk to other creatives that visit us in the studio, it's something that at least I personally like to mention, especially if they're on the emerging artist side of things, to basically say you can't just depend on the sales of your art alone. That's like depending on a quote unquote regular 9 to 5 employer. That is just
Yeah.
one income stream. And if they decide to shut down a location, if they decide to do layoffs, or like in the case of your art, like if you depend on just one platform, which we'll talk about, and that platform is shut down and that's the only
Spoiler.
way you make money,
Spoiler.
like you can't just have Etsy, like if you're gonna do it online, you need to have Etsy and like other platforms, not just
Yeah.
one, because they don't belong to you and they may go away. So much in the same way, I'm glad that you gave our listeners that reminder of like, no, you need to have different ways in which you make money. And yes, you will
Yeah.
have to shift back and forth between which ones pay better versus which ones you enjoy versus which ones you maybe not enjoy as much but still pay the bills. And it's a dance. It's definitely a dance.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think one thing that before we talk about platforms that may or may not go away. I think it would be helpful for each of us to share like one key takeaway that's more, I guess, action oriented for our listeners on here. And when thinking about that, I was really focusing on no surprise to many of our listeners if you've been listening for a while, but I am a very like action oriented person, like not just talking about a process, but putting it into place, especially when it comes to a marketing and making life for my future self easier. That's like always top of mind for me of like, what thing am I going to wish that I had done last week? So next week I'll be able to be like, wow, I'm so glad I did that. So, um, post conference, really thinking about that shift, I think for me, which I think it's a big step in the muralist world or even like fine art, it still applies of are you applying for open calls where they say, we as the city have these projects available, put your name in the hat and maybe we'll consider you, versus contacting clients directly, right? I think for the fine art equivalent, it's okay, if there's a group show, if there's an open call for a solo show, to where you want to show in order to get exposure to potential collectors versus hosting events that collectors can come to and talk to you directly or like putting yourself in front of them without the middleman, right? So, um, from an action standpoint, one of the things that I've already done post conference that I'm so glad that I have now is creating those marketing assets, one of which is a document that's evergreen, and then one that is essentially a scope of work proposal that's specific for the client. And I obviously that's applying to the mural process, but I think always asking yourself, okay, does this have to be client specific or collector specific, or is this an evergreen? Anyone needs to know this information, and therefore your future self doesn't have to keep recreating the same thing over and over again. You don't need to keep rewriting your artist statement from scratch every time. You can write it during this period. So, creating those templates for yourself, I think, is my biggest key takeaway because it just makes life so much easier.
Yeah, yeah. And
Yeah,
depending what artistic practice you have, for muralists, it might be portfolios or pitch decks. For visual artists, it might just be a portfolio that also has your artist statement and talks about the kind of opportunities you're looking for. And it's something you want to send to curators or gallery
right.
owners, or, it just really depends. But or if you're looking to be on podcasts, you could have some kind of
Yeah,
template that you send to, podcast hosts and be like, here are some topics that we can talk about, and here are things about my artistic practice that I think could make a good episode. So it's completely up to you what you do with this. I think like the easiest example of this is like things like a CV. Like once you
yeah,
start creating your artist resume, you just kind of add to it, but you don't try to redo it from the
right.
ground up. You just kind of tweak it a little bit, or even your portfolio, PDF type documents, you just tweak it over time. But it'll save you so much time instead of like, oh no, I have to do this for this upcoming application due in 3 hours. And I didn't realize they needed an artist statement. Shoulda, coulda, woulda, and that is okay. Just get it over with. And if you don't make it to this one, that's fine, but you'll have it for the next one. So yeah, those type of things. That's really good points. I think for me, some of the top takeaways from the conference, and the conference itself, as well as some of the folks that I interacted with, was the reinforcement that murals, just like fine art, depend on relationships. Should be a given, but anything art related, anything creative, it's really about who you know, and much less about the art itself. Like you can have amazing art, and if it never leaves the basement, nobody knows it exists. So and the art doesn't talk for itself. Like definitely, like you need to talk about it, and or have allies that talk about it. Maybe you prefer to work with a third party like a gallery, and they're the ones that connect with the collectors on your behalf. But regardless, somebody needs to do the talking about that art. So the
Yeah,
more
so
people you yeah, the more people you interact with, either directly or again, you have a third party do it for you. And the more you show your work, the more likely those opportunities come out of those relationships you have built and nourished. I always keep telling people, need more eyeballs, need more eyeballs, need more eyeballs. And honestly, that's what you know, it's honestly what it boils down to. The more people see it, the more of the people that connect with your artwork, whether it's commercial or fine art, that's where they're at. But it is a numbers game. So one of the golden words, however, from one of our um, wonderful presenters that we had, her name's Lauren Home Sweet Home, please check her out, is when she was talking about shifting to between like all these different creative pursuits, like we're discussing like all these income streams in different ways. I loved how she said there are no pivots, only expansions. And to me, it was just like, it's like this
Yeah,
idea too, like just because you're shifting between stuff, it also doesn't mean you have to discard stuff. You can back burner. Like maybe maybe like there's a type of art product that you'd love to push more, but it really doesn't sell. Like you really want to do these cool art t-shirts, but that's not what pays the bills. So pays the bills is murals. Doesn't mean you can never do shirts. It just means like maybe they don't have as much focus on them or it's not the season for it. And once you get your, recurring income to be a little more stable in other areas, you can kind of take a break from those and then, kind of like move over to the t-shirt world, at least for a little bit, and kind of set the systems in place to promote it and make it a little bit more hands off, while you're working on murals. So it's like there's different ways to approach it, but I like that idea of like you don't just pivot and walk away from the other stuff. Like you just expand and then you decide what area you concentrate on, depending on what stage you're in. Yeah.
exactly. And I feel like I love that point that she made too. And it was so simple, but so validating because it's true. Like life changes, circumstances change. I think that's the benefit of having and exploring multiple creative outlets, multiple income streams, is being able to have those options of the ebbs and flows, right? To where obviously we have previous episodes where we talk about are you the dangers of shiny object syndrome, or is this just a distraction from what your goal is, or is it really a creative avenue that you want to pursue and expand into, which is different for everyone and what your work habits are. But it's definitely a validating, like, pursue where the energy is and why you want to pursue it, and kind of figure out the logistics of that later. So I love that.
Yeah, same. And of course, we have to talk about a certain app many of us have used
Yeah.
at some point or another. And even if you try to get away from it, some of the features in it have ended up in other apps as well. So there's that. But I'll say for me, it was one that was a little too distracting. So I had to even set parental controls on it, on myself. Thank you
Oh,
very
that's
much.
so smart.
Um, well, I would lose track of time, so I had to have it self-lock on me and put a
Yeah.
code, which of course I knew the code, but still, it was a good reminder of I've been on this an hour, it's time to go. Um, Good for occasional entertainment. I know for a lot of folks it is a way to add to their income. I did get some laughs out of it, but at the end of the day, I had to stay away. Like I just did not, yeah, I could not put good limits on it. But without further ado, Jackie, what app, pray tell, are we talking about?
Drum roll, please. Which, for context, after we got back from the conference is when all this went down. And so I feel like if you have not heard about it, the TikTok legislation, which for the sake of today's episode and keeping it less than 3 hours long, we won't dive too much into it. But from a studio update, we had to talk about things that are affecting creative business owners in the world, including a big one, this TikTok potential ban and legislation. We're not going to go into the logistics of why it's getting banned, if it should be banned, taking stances by any means. But obviously, in the past, there has been threat of TikTok going away. And as someone who was working in digital marketing, doing social media for several small companies across the country. It was very interesting navigating those moments and then also recognizing points where other platforms had temporary glitches where they would go out. I remember like Facebook specifically, I think it was like 2 years ago, was just down for like 24 hours with like no reason, or like it was literally just like a programming software that had a bug in it. And then it ended up going back up and it was fine. But even just brief moments like that, for me, really triggered as a business owner that reality of these platforms, they feel like, oh, well, they're always going to be there. Facebook's always going to be there. Instagram's always going to be there. To where I think when the TikTok platform went away, which we thought was forever at like 11 p.m., um, a fateful Saturday night in January. And then it came back by like lunchtime the next day. I think it really showed a lot of people um, that, oh, this is so temporary. We think it's like this whole experience, this curated algorithm, these saved folders of videos, these creative ideas I've pinned, and all of that, it can just go away literally overnight, and you do not have anything to show for it, right? Um, from a business standpoint, we wanted to touch on kind of that importance of um, owning your own business and owning your audience, because as wonderful as it is to say, oh, I have not even like 1 million followers, I have 1,000 followers on a platform. That's 1,000 people, which is amazing. And you want to share your work with the world and you need to talk about it. And we just talked about that. But literally the platform could go down tomorrow. So thinking about all of the time that you put into your social media content, which again is important and you should still do it, but then thinking, okay, well, literally there's hours and hours and hours of time could literally just be for quote unquote nothing tomorrow. It's so crazy. So I think people really waking up to experiencing that and understanding the importance of owning your audience through an email newsletter is very important, because email is not going to go away. And when
As far as we
you,
know.
as far as we know, if email goes away, that means the internet in general is down, which is a bigger issue that we will have to face with.
Or we'll be
As
connecting telepathically at that point when
right.
needed.
And I think the clarifying point with that is when we say, like, well, you need to own your audience, logistically, what we mean is, so when you have an email newsletter, you're not building it off of one platform specifically. It's different from like, oh, I want followers on Instagram, to where if you decide, like, or TikTok, for example, because that's prevalent. If you say, I want to grow my following on TikTok, and then people say, okay, well, TikTok is being banned this weekend. You can tell your followers, I'm going to be on Instagram or I'm going to be on YouTube. But you really have to, they have to be the ones that decide to follow you on those other platforms. You can't just download all of your followers from TikTok and upload them to Instagram. If you could, that would be amazing. But you can with an email newsletter. So if you'd use a hosting site, let's say MailChimp, and which is the one that I use, you can essentially, yes, you're using their platform to send the emails, but what you really own is the list of emails. Meaning, if you think of a spreadsheet, first name, last name, what their email address is. To where if I say I want to go to a different platform, I don't want to use MailChimp anymore, I literally can download all of those contacts, upload them to a different platform, and the experience for people receiving the newsletter is the same in terms of it
Mhm.
shows in their inbox, they open it, they experience it. So that's like the huge power of it. That I just think is so important. And many business owners, especially creative business owners, don't think about that. So, legislation aside, and my mini TikTok rant over, I think, if anything, I hope the blackout for 12 hours, and maybe at the time of this airing, it will be gone forever. Who knows? But hopefully, it showed people how important and also like how frivolous social media can be. but how
Hmm.
important having a newsletter is. Because like that's a real business asset is
Yeah.
an email.
Yeah. Well, and it's like, didn't TikTok come out of another music app? What was the other one called?
Musically, yeah.
Yeah, which is gone. So it's like, or like you all remember MySpace. Well, if you're old enough, you remember
Eh,
MySpace. It's like just because they've been around a long time and millions of people use them doesn't mean they're gonna stick around. Actually, I think
yeah.
MySpace still somehow exists. But anyways, like who even uses that anymore? But it's definitely one of those things of like if you are going to put any of your efforts, so to speak, on social media, definitely don't just stick to one platform. We do agree with a lot of people out there that will tell you if you want to grow online, like kind of like specialize in one. Like don't try to do all of them at once. So it's kind of a mixture of things. Like, yes, it's okay to kind of focus your efforts on one, start growing it, start doing strategy, and then move on to the next one, and then move on to the next one, but never just one. And that is all you do because we don't, it's like Jackie said, we don't own them. Not only that, even to grow them, we have to follow all the rules and those rules can change all the time. It just gets like extremely complicated. So honestly, like if you're going to scale up your presence online, definitely you have to split it up. And those folks that are supporting you, that are following you, by you also having multiple platforms, you're giving them a choice of how do they want to consume what you are putting together for them. So for some of them, TikTok might be the way to go. For some of them, LinkedIn is the way to go, like, which is
Mhm.
almost more like professional networking than social media, but I digress. Or Pinterest, like you're giving them a choice. And then email is just email, like we discussed. So you may change the provider, behind it and kind of like what features are available. But at the end of the day, they don't have to download any new apps of any sort. It's still their same app they also use for email, but maybe like now you have like a different like color scheme that you can do when you change providers or better deliverability rating, which is a story for another day. But yeah, definitely don't put all your eggs in one basket. That's for sure.
Yeah, and I think the biggest takeaway there, besides developing and growing a newsletter list, is really that reframe that you mentioned, Adriana. It's like focus on making content for who your target audience is, like for that future collector, for that future mural client. Because although social media can be taken away anytime, it is still valuable from a marketing standpoint. So I know at least for me, looking forward into 2025, and even just marketing in general, focusing more on, yes, video content, 100%. That's how I like consuming content that really connects with people, but focusing on kind of like that discipline of making the content and really solidifying and clarifying the message to your audience and not being so focused on the follower count or like that vanity metric of obviously stats can be helpful, but I think it can be very easy to get so bogged down in the like engagement rates and number of likes and number of followers. When like if you just focus on the skill of developing content consistently that can be shared on multiple platforms or featured in your newsletter, um, and having a messaging that really speaks to who you want to be contacting and being in touch with, then it's worth it, right? So not focusing on follower count, focus on developing those skills and the discipline.
Yeah, for sure.
So
And next up, we're going to be talking about some action items we're excited to, put into place that you can try too if they apply to your art and business. But first, a quick word from our sponsors.
this episode is brought to you by our Level Up Artist resources.
We understand that life as a modern artist can be both exciting and overwhelming. Plus, there's a lot of information out there, but what do visual artists actually need?
We've spent countless hours of trial and error, weeding through tons of information to find the gold so that you don't have to waste time going down those endless rabbit holes.
We created a library of PDF resources with bonus videos that cover everything from artist documents to exhibition prep, social media to technology, sales strategies, and artist mindset, several templates, and more.
Ready to get started? Head on over to levelupartist.com/shop to level up your creative career today. Welcome back, everyone. So, Adriana, as we wrap up today's episode, what is something that you are taking action on right now that you think our listeners could benefit from trying too, whether it's art related, personal, or with your business?
So I feel like I have a variety pack when it comes to this. And no, it's not all murals, I promise. Although a lot of them are mural related. So as we're, at the time of this recording and when the episode comes out, I am continuing with all the different steps and actions that are involved in running an in-person mural workshop and retreat. Um, you can check my website for details in case there are any spots available and it's something you're interested in. But definitely balancing painting skills with business skills. I wanted to have a little bit of both as part of the workshop. So there's a lot of different things I need to do leading up to it. And as of the time of this recording, there's like different videos that I need to post up and with more descriptions, more details about the schedule, things of that nature. There's a lot more involved than I thought, but I'm learning. This is going to make it easier. Speaking of, which we mentioned earlier, um, creating templates that can help me for when I do version 2.0, which, more to come on that. Another thing that I've been putting into action and continue to work on is I've been late 2024, early 2025, started the process of switching my business structure from sole proprietor to LLC. There's 5 billion steps involved. It feels like they're not hard. It's just a lot of steps to do so, changing the bank accounts, changing where subscription payments come out of, moving them to a different checking account, making sure my bookkeeping system is like reflecting all the transactions from the new accounts. There's a lot of steps involved. But like I said, not hard, just long. Updating my insurance company, just updating my contract templates. There's a lot of steps involved, but worth it, worth it. Another thing I've been doing is I've been updating my mural pitch deck slash portfolio for specific industries, and it's something really cool. I've been making one that's just murals, but I've also been working on one that also has my fine art paintings as well as sculptures so that I can use that to pitch for potential show opportunities, exhibition opportunities. So more to come on that in the future. Website updates. I've done a few, but I want to do more. I want to be able to make it a little bit clearer that I have three main lines of artwork. And right now it's a lot more focused on fine art paintings, which is fine, a little bit to sculpture, a little bit to murals, but I want to make it a little clearer to somebody visiting my website that I do all three. I love all three. I'm going to continue all three, but kind of make them a little bit more on the same playing field. I'm also working on new resources in PDF form. Some of them are going to be free, some of them are going to be paid, always affordable, however, but these are going to be specific to areas that I've specialized in or that I get a lot of questions about. So more to come on that, of course, in a future episode. I'm also putting more effort into research, bringing this back. This was I think more of a 2023 um, kind of goal, or maybe early 2024 pre-injury. But I want to get back to looking at mural festivals and artist residencies that are aligned with my goals. I found some really cool residencies that are overseas, where either I could focus more on the sculpture side of things, the painting side of things, or of course the mural side of things. But they're more like focused on specific areas of my artistic practice. So I want to see which of those, number one, I can afford, because we always have to think about that, like the expenses of it, but not just from a money perspective, also from a time perspective. So super duper important. And then a lot more nerdy and financially heavy type conversation that I've been having is regarding saving for retirement. This is literally the industry I worked in, investments for 13 years before going full time with art. And after doing art for many years, several years now. Yeah, I quit in 2019. So, after all these years, I haven't really put that much focus onto the retirement side of things. I already had savings in my 401k, old 401ks and IRAs, but I've been starting to think about, okay, is this the year where we're going to start having the art business contribute not just to my regular savings account? I've always done that. I'll always do that. That's super important for me. But actually, investment accounts that once the money goes in, you can't touch it until your retirement age. So I haven't been doing that
The
much of
off
that.
limit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I've been monitoring my investment accounts, making changes periodically as needed, but not necessarily contributing funds to them. So I'm definitely looking at the IRA limits for 2025 and trying to make a plan of how often I'm going to contribute and what amount I'm going to contribute for the year and kind of splitting that up throughout the year. So it might be a monthly or a quarterly type contribution. Still working out the details, but I'm like, well, I do come from that, from that educational and work background. I need to implement it into, my art business and, bring some of that back or put some of those actions into place. How about
Yeah.
you, Jackie?
I love all of that. Obviously, that's a long list of things that you're taking action on, which I love. And it's actually funny that you mentioned that last point because literally yesterday I was mapping out my spreadsheets, doing something similar, um, thinking about money differently and investment. So maybe we'll have future conversations about that moving forward. But for the sake of time today, as we wrap up today's episode, I'm just going to focus on kind of one action item that's been a top priority for me. Is I kind of set the goal to further dive into learning and being comfortable with designing on an iPad and using Procreate as a tool. And so that's been a big focus for me lately. It definitely was in 2024, just like the basic navigation and getting comfortable with it. I did a couple of mock-ups using the iPad, but it was like I did the drawings by hand first, took a picture, and then basically like traced it on the iPad, not starting from a blank slate. So that's been my goal for 2025. And an idea that I got from the conference that I did want to share with our listeners has been really helping with that is one, obviously like creating like mock projects for myself, which I was doing before the conference. But one of them in particular is a lot of fun and it kind of hits the two different marks of not only setting goals for the year or continuing to dream big in that way, but also learning the technology. And it's creating a bingo card for yourself. So this was an idea that I got from one of the women that I shared an Airbnb with, and she does it with members of her muraling team that she pays full time to paint murals with. So I'm like, clearly she's doing things right. So she basically gives each of her employees a custom bingo card at the start of the year. And it's full of different things that they can mark off. I think there's like a prize associated with when you hit the get a bingo, but you can get multiple bingos throughout the year too. Like you can get the horizontal and the vertical and the diagonal. And it's more than just like what, 9 squares. You can make it as big as you want. So I've been working on building out my bingo card. And it's really, really fun because the elements that you put in the card can be as vague or as specific as you want. So a few ideas you can do, okay, like I want to hit a certain amount of income for a given month, right? I want to make $100 with my art this month. I want to make $5,000 with my art in 1 month. You could do, okay, once you hit an annual income milestone, that's when you get to check it off. Or even things specific that kind of gamify what your goals are of, okay, what products do I want to make this year? I want to design a water bottle. I want to design a coloring book. I want to design whatever it is. And then that way, when you actually take action, do it, and implement it, you get to like check it off the list, so to speak. Um, what mural clients, like having clients in different industries, like me specifically looking at technology software companies, looking at gyms, looking at franchised companies. Just a way to keep it top of mind. Oh, right, like that's a priority for me this year. Let's focus on that in the next couple weeks. Collaborating with fellow local entrepreneurs to host events at my studio, a client upsell opportunity. So if someone has a mural, being able to upsell them with, oh, I also do custom corporate awards too. If you want an award that matches the mural or is similar color palette to the mural, creating murals that include X, Y, and Z color palettes or motifs or a certain scale. All just things that you think about of, oh, that would be cool to do one day. I want to do that at some point this year. But unless you're looking at that piece of paper of your goals or in that Word document, they can kind of be not top of mind. So designing it in a bingo card to where you can print it off, make it look pretty, not just have the goals in there, but I'm using it as an exercise for Procreate to, okay, can I draw technology motifs in here? Can I put the color palettes in that color palette square? And almost making each square like its own composition, just as a way to get to know the technology. So whether you're looking to dive into a specific software, thinking about, okay, how can I have a fun project that's no pressure, that still lets me learn the software better? Or if you just want to make a handwritten bingo card, even just having that gamified experience for your goals can be super fun. And if you don't hit a specific goal, there's not like shame to it. It's not like, well, you didn't get that diagonal bingo, so you're a failure. But it's like, okay, well, if I really stop dragging my feet and release that water bottle that I've redesigned 3 times, just pull the trigger and do it, then I'll get this bingo and then I'll feel good. So kind of gamifying the goals in a way. And if you do that, definitely send me a picture on Instagram because I want to see your bingo cards.
Absolutely. I love that idea. Well, with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap up today's conversation, and we hope you enjoyed this episode.
As always, our blog will be linked in today's show notes where you can find episode notes and links to all of our other podcast episodes.
If you want to stay connected with us in between episodes, share your feedback, or have a question you would like for us to answer on the podcast, you can reach us through social media. I'm at MAArt across all platforms.
And I'm at J Sanders Studio on all platforms. And if you want to follow the podcast, we are at Level Up Artist on Instagram.
You can also visit levelupartist.com to get immediate access to templates, resources, and course modules to level up your creative career today.
Thank you so much for listening. We'll talk to you next week.